Welcome to Reformed Thinking. We take a deep dive into texts that, well, challenge the way we view reality. So, imagine getting an email from your human resources department this afternoon.
Oh, boy. Nobody wants that email.
Right. But the subject line says, mandatory company gala.
Okay.
And you open it, and it says you have to attend a corporate dinner tonight. But here's the catchment about. The meat being served has been ritually sacrificed to a pagan deity.
Wow. Okay, that's a twist.
Yeah, and the entertainment is, well, state-sponsored immorality.
Yeah.
And if you reply saying you're opting out because of your faith, the consequences are immediate. Your bank accounts are frozen, your business license is gone, and you are socially exiled.
It sounds like a dystopian novel, honestly.
It really does.
Yeah.
But for a first-century resident of Ephesus, that was literally just a normal Tuesday. So today, we're doing a deep dive into an extensive stack of source materials. We've got exegetical essays and sermon notes that break down the anatomy of worldliness.
Yeah, looking at its historical roots and its cosmic destiny.
Precisely. And our mission today is to unpack all of this, centered around 1 John chapter 2, verses 16 and 17.
And setting the stage with that historical context is so helpful, because what stands out right away in these sources is that 1 John chapter 2 is basically functioning as a loving alarm clock.
A loving alarm clock. I like that.
Yeah, it brings absolute moral clarity to a cultural landscape that is, intentionally murky. The culture around them is constantly saying, hey, indulge your desires, elevate your status, get more wealth, and it makes it all feel incredibly normal.
And completely unavoidable, right?
Yeah, unavoidable. But the text forces a definitive choice on the reader. It sets up this stark contrast between a dying system and the eternal Father. There is no middle ground offered at all.
I was looking at these sources, and the precision of the apostles' critique is just striking. And I want to speak directly to you, the listener, about your daily experience. You are living in a society that constantly tells you to focus on your own gratification, your own truth, your own brand.
Oh, all day long.
So how does a text written to a first-century audience diagnose our 21st century lives with such surgical accuracy? Well, to answer that, we have to look at the hostile ground where these original believers actually lived.
Right. Before we can even analyze the anatomy of sin, we need to understand the pressure cooker of Ephesus around, say, 85 to 95 AD. We really have to establish that geographic and historical background to grasp the sheer weight of John's commands.
So paint that picture for us. What was Ephesus like?
Well, the sources paint a very vivid picture. This was not some quiet rural outpost. It was a cosmopolitan, incredibly wealthy banking hub. It was the commercial center of Asia Minor.
The New York or London of its day.
Basically, yeah. And dominating the skyline and the economy and the culture was the magnificent Temple of Artemis, which, was one of the seven wonders of the ancient world.
Right.
But it wasn't just a religious site. It functioned essentially as the central bank of the region. So the religious, economic, and social spheres were entirely fused together.
That is wild.
Yeah. You could not buy bread, conduct business, or socialize without bumping into state-sponsored idolatry.
And that brings us back to the HR analogy I started with. The sources describe these Roman trade guilds, the collegia. And I'm trying to wrap my mind around the psychological toll this would take on a Christian family.
It would be immense.
Right, like if you were a tent maker, a silversmith, a merchant, you had to be in the guild to survive. And these guild meetings were held in pagan temples. Refusing to participate meant you couldn't sell your goods in the marketplace.
Economic ruin, starvation even.
Yeah, and you'd be branded a hater of humanity.
Mm.
So the pressure to conform wasn't just a slight temptation to be popular. It was a matter of basic physical survival.
The economic squeeze was intense, and on top of that, the sources detail the severe political threat of imperial persecution, specifically under the reign of Emperor Domitian.
The Caesar cult, right?
Yeah. The Roman state demanded that citizens declare Caesar is Lord. Burning a pinch of incense to the emperor was the ultimate boast of human arrogance. It was claiming divine prerogatives for a mortal politician.
A loyalty test.
That's it. To refuse that pinch of incense was to invite the wrath of the Roman Empire. They viewed you as an insurrectionist.
Okay, so you've got economic strangulation from the trade guilds on one side and the political sword of the empire on the other. But the sources point out an internal threat that seems even more dangerous.
Oh, absolutely.
And I was looking at this historical data, and I was honestly confused by the focus on the internal threat. If these believers are facing the might of Rome and total economic ruin, why is John so fiercely concerned with some obscure philosophers inside the church? The Gnostics, I think.
That is a crucial question. The primary internal threat came from the Cerinthian Gnostics, named after a false teacher, Cerinthus. And the reason John targets them so fiercely is that they offered a theological loophole to the persecution.
A loophole, how so?
They taught a dualistic heresy. They separated the physical realm from the spiritual realm completely. So in their view, physical matter was either entirely evil or just totally irrelevant, and the spirit alone was good and capable of knowing God.
Oh, I see how that works. If the physical body doesn't matter, then what you do with it doesn't matter.
Spot on.
It sounds like high-level Greek philosophy, but the practical consequences are devastating.
The consequences were catastrophic for holiness. This dualism led directly to gross moral laxity. These false teachers convinced people that they could go ahead and attend the pagan feasts. They could indulge in sexual immorality.
Just check the box to save their business.
Yeah, participate in the emperor cult to save their businesses. They argued that because the body was separate from the spirit, they could do all these physical acts of rebellion without doing any harm to their eternal souls.
Wow. That is incredibly deceptive.
Right. They claimed to possess a secret, elevated knowledge of God while living in total moral darkness. It was a way to avoid persecution by compromising with the culture while still feeling spiritual.
And the sources note that John writes this letter to combat that specific lie. He just completely obliterates that loophole. He proves that true fellowship with God requires visible, holy obedience.
Yeah, you cannot claim to walk in the light while your feet are running toward the dark.
Right, the physical and the spiritual are connected. So, since the Ephesian believers lived in this intensely hostile environment, pagan temples, economic coercion, false teachers offering easy compromises, we have to look closely at what John means when he commands them not to love the world.
We really do. The vocabulary John uses is highly specific. We need a lexical breakdown of the Greek word cosmos.
Cosmos.
Yeah. When modern readers hear the word world, they tend to think of the physical planet, mountains, oceans, forests, animals.
The globe.
Right. But in this specific context, cosmos does not refer to physical creation. The biblical worldview, starting way back in Genesis, declares that physical creation is fundamentally good.
And the incarnate Christ took on a physical body, which proves materiality itself is not the enemy.
That's right. So cosmos refers to the organized system of human rebellion. The Greek word originally meant order or arrangement, which is actually where we get the word cosmetics.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But John uses it to describe the social, economic, and philosophical structure that operates entirely apart from God's rule. The sources highlight that this invisible system is orchestrated by Satan.
So is humanity organizing itself in defiance of the Creator, establishing its own values, its own metrics for success, its own moral code?
That's a great summary.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second here, because this is where people can easily veer into a strange asceticism.
Oh, for sure. They can swing too far.
Right. So if I appreciate a beautiful piece of art, or if I enjoy a really good steak dinner with my family, or if I work incredibly hard at my career to provide for my kids, am I loving the world? Does enjoying the physical realm mean I'm participating in the cosmos?
That is a vital boundary to define clearly, and the source materials are very careful to clarify this distinction. Honest labor, civic responsibility, enjoying good food, family affection, these are good gifts from God.
Okay, good. I like steak.
Yeah, me too. They are part of the created order. They are meant to be enjoyed with thanksgiving. The physical world is a theater of God's glory.
So where does the line get crossed? How does a good gift become part of the rebel system?
Worldliness happens when the created order becomes an idol. It's a matter of valuation.
Valuation. Explain that.
It's treating the present age as your absolute treasure, your master, your core identity, and your final home. Enjoying a meal is a gift. Living only for your next culinary pleasure is worldliness. Working hard is a biblical assignment, but treating your career status and your bank account as your ultimate worth and security, that is worldliness. The cosmos trains you to desire the creation without ever acknowledging or submitting to the creator.
That clears up a lot of confusion. The world is an operating system running in the background of society, and its core programming is autonomy from God.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it.
And John gives us a very specific anatomy of how this rebel system operates inside the human heart. The sources outline this beautifully. Worldliness often wears very ordinary clothes.
Very ordinary.
It doesn't always show up demanding that you bow down to a golden statue. Often, it shows up as a subtle shift in our affections. So let's look at the anatomy of these rebel affections, starting with the flesh.
Okay, the first component John identifies is the lust of the flesh, or in Greek, epithumia tes sarkos. This is the inward gravitational pull toward gratification apart from God's boundaries. It is a powerful craving for what is forbidden.
Let's clarify the word flesh, because earlier we established that the physical body isn't evil, but here the flesh is framed as the primary problem.
The distinction is critical here. Flesh, in this theological context, does not mean your physical skin, muscles, and bones.
Right.
It refers to the fallen human nature inherited from Adam. It's the internal engine of depravity. The physical body is not the enemy. The physical body is morally neutral. It's the instrument. The indwelling sin, the fallen nature that commands the body to rebel, that is the enemy.
How does this lust of the flesh show up in our daily habits? Because it seems like it covers a pretty wide range of human behavior.
It includes things like gluttony, laziness, rage, and sexual immorality. It's any physical appetite that refuses the discipline of holiness. The body is meant to be presented to God as an instrument of righteousness, right?
Right.
But the flesh demands that the body serve its own illicit cravings. The flesh says, I have a desire and I have the right to satisfy it right now, regardless of what God says.
The next category John introduces is the lust of the eyes, or epithumieton ophthalmon. The sources connect ancient covetousness to our modern visual culture in a way that is just incredibly convicting. If the flesh is the internal craving, the eyes seem to be the external trigger.
That is the precise mechanism. The lust of the eyes is covetousness triggered by sight. The eyes act as the unthinking scout for the idol-making heart.
The unthinking scout.
Yeah, they scan the horizon, see something appealing, evaluate it apart from God's provision, and trigger a demand for it. The eyes feed the flesh.
And the sources point to some heavy biblical examples to illustrate how catastrophic this can be. There's the story of Achan in the book of Joshua.
Oh, man, that's a stark one.
Yeah, the Israelites are told not to take any plunder from Jericho. But Achan sees a beautiful Babylonian garment and some silver and gold, and the text specifically notes that he saw them, he coveted them, and he took them. His eyes led to an action that brought disaster upon the entire camp.
Well, I shouldn't say exactly. It's precisely what happened.
Right. And then there's King David. He is lingering on his rooftop when he should be at war. He looks down and sees Bathsheba bathing. The eye is the gateway. He saw, he desired, and the resulting destruction fractured his whole kingdom.
And if we bring this dynamic into the present day, the application is staggering. The modern internet and social media platforms act as a constant high-speed pipeline for consumer craving and visual envy. The technology is literally designed to hijack this specific mechanism.
Let's look at the neuroscience of that for a second. You're scrolling through a feed. Within 60 seconds, your visual cortex is bombarded with images. You see someone else's pristine vacation in the Maldives.
Yeah.
You see their flawless kitchen renovation. You see their seemingly perfect fitness routine. Your conscious, logical brain does not even have time to evaluate the reality behind those images.
It's just a flood of data.
A flood. Your eyes are gathering all this highly curated data and handing it directly to your fallen nature. And the flesh immediately says, I want that. I deserve that. My life is inadequate. God is holding out on me. The dopamine loop is tied entirely to ancient covetousness.
That's a brilliant way to frame it. The lust of the eyes is a restless, relentless surveying of life for something God has not assigned to you. It's the heart refusing contentment. It's the belief that if you just acquire the next visual stimulus you saw, you will finally find satisfaction.
But the system is designed to keep you craving indefinitely. It never stops.
Never.
So we have the inward craving of the flesh and the external trigger of the eyes. The third category John gives us shifts the focus to outward arrogance, doesn't it?
It does. The boastful pride of life. And the lexical analysis of this Greek phrase, alazonia to bio, is really fascinating. It's a rare phrase in the New Testament, and it carries very specific cultural baggage.
Let's unpack those words. What kind of person comes to mind when a first-century Greek speaker hears the word alazonia?
Well, in Greco-Roman literature and comedy, the word alazon was used to describe a braggart, a charlatan, or a quack.
A quack. Like a snake oil salesman.
Yeah, someone who walked around the marketplace claiming fake achievements, a doctor selling fake cures, a merchant pretending to have massive wealth or status they didn't actually possess. It is the essence of pretension and boasting.
And what about the second word, bios? We get biology from that.
Bios refers to physical livelihood and earthly resources. It is entirely different from the Greek word zoe, which is used to describe spiritual or eternal life. So bios is your stuff. It's your bank account, your resume, your house, your material sustenance.
Putting that together, the pride of life is the arrogant display of wealth and status. It's the charlatan strutting around, attempting to live independently of God, relying entirely on earthly resources.
Yeah, it's the spirit of the fool in Christ's parable who says, "Look at my barns, look at my stored grain, soul, take your ease." It is projecting a false image of self-sufficiency. It's the belief that your bios, your resources, make you immune to the reality of God's judgment.
The parallel to our modern society is unavoidable. Think about the phenomenon of accumulating massive consumer debt just to project a false image of prosperity.
Right.
People buy things they do not need with money they do not have to impress people they do not even know. Or think about self-branding on social media. You curate every minor detail of your life to look incredibly successful and put together,
Yeah.
or relying entirely on massive financial portfolios for absolute security, living under the illusion that a market crash or a terminal medical diagnosis cannot touch you. It is the modern Alazan, the charlatan pretending to be God over his own life.
And the sources draw a sharp origin contrast regarding these three categories. John establishes an absolute boundary. He says these desires, the craving of the flesh, the covetousness of the eyes, the boasting of the pride of life, do not come from the Father. They originate entirely from the world.
This is a massive theological point. There is no neutral sanctuary. A desire either originates from God or it originates from the rebel system.
That's right. The impulses of the fallen system are fundamentally hostile to God. God is not the author of this corrupt craving. If an impulse comes from this fallen system, it cannot be blended with love for the Father. You cannot synthesize the two.
If these three temptations, the flesh, the eyes, the pride, are entirely woven into human existence, how can anyone possibly escape this system? I mean, it feels like we are completely trapped by our own nature. If my internal desires are compromised and my eyes are constantly betraying me and my pride wants to boast, what hope do I have?
That is the devastating reality of human depravity. Left to ourselves, we are completely enslaved to the cosmos. But the sources answer this dilemma by pointing to the concept of federal headship.
Oh, that's a key concept in our theology.
Very much so. They draw a stunning contrast between the first Adam in the garden and the last Adam, Jesus Christ, in the wilderness.
Let's walk through that contrast carefully. Take us back to the fall in Genesis chapter 3. How does this anatomy of worldliness map onto the first sin?
In Genesis 3.6, we see the exact anatomy of worldliness play out with terrifying precision. The serpent tempts Eve, and she evaluates the forbidden fruit through three distinct lenses.
Okay, what's the first?
First, she saw that the tree was good for food. That appeals directly to the lust of the flesh, the physical appetite. Second, she saw that it was a delight to the eyes. That is the lust of the eyes, the visual covetousness.
And the third?
Third, she saw that the tree was desirable to make one wise, grasping for autonomy and status apart from God. That is the pride of life.
So the first Adam, who represented all of humanity as our federal head, failed drastically in a perfect environment. He capitulated to the world system at the very first test, plunging all of humanity into condemnation and bondage to these desires.
That's the tragedy of the fall. Now fast forward to the wilderness temptation of Jesus in Matthew chapter 4. Christ, the second Adam, steps into a ruined, fallen environment. The Holy Spirit leads him into the wilderness, and after he fasts for 40 days, Satan presents the exact same tripartite temptation.
I see the parallel. It's so clear. Satan offers Jesus bread to satisfy his intense, agonizing physical hunger. He challenges him to turn stones into bread. That is the direct assault on the lust of the flesh.
And Christ refused, quoting Deuteronomy, relying entirely on the word of God rather than physical gratification. Then Satan takes him to a high mountain and shows him all the kingdoms of the earth and their glory. This is a visual temptation of massive scale, the lust of the eyes.
And Christ refused to bow to Satan to acquire them. He chose the path of the cross instead of immediate visual glory. Finally, Satan takes him to the pinnacle of the temple and urges him to throw himself down to publicly prove his status as the Son of God, forcing God to send angels to rescue him. A public, arrogant display. The pride of life.
And Christ stood firm. This is the Christological fulfillment of the entire text. Jesus, the second Adam, succeeded perfectly where the first Adam failed. He flawlessly rejected the world system. He perfectly did the will of the Father in every category where we fail.
This is the turning point of the whole analysis. Because of Christ's perfect, flawless obedience, his righteousness is imputed to the believer through faith. Our standing before God is not based on our flawed attempts to conquer the flesh.
Yes, believers are not saved by generating their own sinless personal obedience. The gospel is that we are saved by union with the eternal Son of God who already overcame the world on our behalf. His victory becomes our victory.
That shifts the entire tone of John's command from crushing moralism to incredible hope. We are not just trying harder to fight the world, we are resting in the one who has already crushed the serpent's head.
And because Christ decisively defeated the world at the cross, the ultimate destinies of the two systems are sealed. This brings us to the contrasting destinies outlined in verse 17, the sinking ship of the world versus the abiding saint.
John writes that the world is passing away, and also its lusts. The Greek word he uses here is perigetai. The sources say the grammatical tense of this word is the key to understanding our current reality.
The tense of that verb is vital. It is a present passive indicative. It means the world is currently in the process of dissolution. The death sentence has already been pronounced. It's not just that the world will end someday in the distant future. It is actively ending right now.
One of the sources uses a brilliant analogy for this. It's like looking up at a star in the night sky. To the naked eye, it looks incredibly bright. It looks permanent, massive, and immovable. But astronomers will tell you that the star actually went supernova a million years ago. The structural integrity has already collapsed. The core is entirely dead. We are just waiting for the light to finally fade from our view. The world system is a supernova. It looks powerful, but the death sentence was pronounced at the cross. Why would you invest your heart, your energy, and your identity into a structure that is already dead?
You wouldn't, or at least you shouldn't. The world is a sinking ship, and its passing away is guaranteed. But John contrasts that fading, dying world with the obedient believer. He says, the one who does the will of God abides forever. The Greek word for abides is mene.
The sources emphasize that this word carries heavy covenantal weight in John's writings. It is not a temporary dwelling.
No, it guarantees eternal security and indissoluble union with God. The one who does the will of God is kept entirely by the sovereign grace of God. They belong to the eternal realm, not the fading realm.
We need to provide some strict theological clarity here on the concept of perseverance. Because someone might hear the phrase, the one who does the will of God abides forever, and think, okay, my eternal security is based on my performance. I have to earn my salvation by maintaining a certain level of good works.
And the source materials strongly reject that works-based interpretation. The one who does the will of God does not earn justification by their obedience. Rather, active, habitual obedience is the visible, inevitable fruit of justifying faith.
So the obedience is the evidence of the root, not the cause of the root.
Precisely. The believer will stumble. John already addressed this in chapter 1. When believers sin, they confess. They are cleansed by Christ our advocate, and they continue on the path of doing God's will. The sources are definitive in rejecting the idea that a true believer can lose their salvation. Those who truly possess saving faith are kept by God. Their abiding is guaranteed by Christ's victory, not their own perfection.
That brings an immense amount of comfort. But it also demands that we look at how this theology applies to the modern church context. The exegetical essays we are looking at draw a very sharp line from this first-century text to our 21st century church landscape. The authors argue that several modern movements fall into these same categories of worldliness. How does this passage change the way the listener evaluates modern Christianity?
The sources apply this text as a diagnostic tool against errors currently infecting modern evangelicalism. The reasoning laid out in the notes is that these movements attempt to synthesize the cosmos with the kingdom. For instance, they point directly at the prosperity gospel.
The critique of the prosperity gospel in these essays is severe. It's unsparing.
Because the argument is that the prosperity gospel explicitly baptizes the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. It takes the very things John says are passing away: wealth, physical ease, material status, and falsely labels them as divine blessings. It encourages the exact brand of worldliness that Christ died to save us from.
And the sources also point to seeker-sensitive pragmatism. The authors argue that using worldly marketing strategies, corporate business models, and entertainment to build the church is essentially an attempt to win the world by imitating the world. It relies on the flesh to produce spiritual results.
Right. The material also brings up egalitarianism and feminism. The source frames these movements as a rebellion against the Creator's ordained boundaries. The essays categorize this under the pride of life, arguing that it is a refusal to submit to a divinely instituted order regarding gender and authority.
And finally, the text addresses critical race theory. The authors label critical race theory as a worldly philosophical framework that divides humanity entirely by the flesh. They argue it relies on worldly metrics of power and grievance, making it incompatible with the unifying truth of the gospel.
Right. And the overarching point the sources make across all these examples is that the church cannot successfully synthesize worldly philosophy with biblical truth. The world is passing away, so hitching the church's wagon to worldly paradigms is theological suicide. Now, to be clear to the listener, we are just conveying the specific arguments laid out in our provided materials regarding these modern movements.
That's an excellent point to clarify. We are impartially reporting the source material's diagnostic critique. But with all of that laid out, the practical question becomes, what does this mean for the listener's daily habits? If we must reject these worldly patterns, how do we actually change our internal desires? You cannot just command your heart to stop wanting things.
The sources offer a brilliant solution here, quoting the 19th century Scottish minister Thomas Chalmers. He preached a famous sermon titled The Expulsive Power of a New Affection.
That concept is the key to practical sanctification. Chalmers argued that you cannot simply will yourself to stop loving the world by sheer force of habit. A negative command is not enough. You cannot leave a vacuum in your heart.
Think about a child playing in the mud. If you just yell at the child to stop eating dirt, they might stop for a moment out of fear, but they still want the dirt. The only way to permanently stop them is to offer them something vastly superior.
Right, you offer them a trip to a theme park or their favorite meal. The new, greater desire naturally expels the lesser desire.
The love of the world must be violently displaced by a superior love for the Father. You have to fall in love with something better. The glory of the eternal God has to grow so large in your vision that it naturally crowds out the lust of the eyes and the pride of life. Your affections must be captured by the eternal, which makes the temporal lose its grip on your heart.
Let's summarize the core takeaways from everything we have unpacked today. You, the listener, stand every day between two distinct realms. On one side is a dying system. It is a supernova. It offers temporary physical desires, constant visual envy, and hollow, exhausting boasting. On the other side is an eternal Father, offering permanent fellowship, peace, and security through the finished work of Jesus Christ.
The reality is that obedience to God is never a waste of time. The culture might mock hidden purity. It might scoff at costly honesty. It might view quiet prayer as useless. But those things belong to the eternal realm. They outlast the world. The things the world values are currently passing away.
I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as you go about the rest of your day. Take a mental inventory. Consider the specific things you boast about right now, the career achievements, the social status, the material possessions you hold dear. If all of those things were placed on a scale against eternity, would they carry any weight at all, or would they vanish like smoke? What if your greatest successes in the eyes of this passing age are actually the very chains keeping you from experiencing true, joyful fellowship with the Father?